And TikTok is collecting your personal data across the internet even if you don't use the app. This is according to a recent report by Consumer Reports. It found that TikTok is partnering with hundreds of websites to gather information on visitors. And you don't even need to have a TikTok account for it to be able to track you. For example, if you look up medical conditions on the WebMD website, TikTok will know what you searched for. Or if you go on the pharmacy store Rite Aid's website and you add something to your cart for you to buy, TikTok will be notified about it. And if you go on some websites that provide financial advice or personal loans, TikTok can get information on your economic situation. And here joining us to talk about TikTok is FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. Commissioner, you've been vocal about possible threats from the Chinese Communist Party and its influence in the U.S. What is the federal government's current position on TikTok?
Well, you're right. I think there's a lot of national security threats posed by TikTok, and we see them from several fronts. One, it's all the data that is flowing back inside of China and potentially being accessed by members of the CCP. Second, it has to do with potential foreign influence campaign, which is using algorithms and other methods of displaying particular content to Americans here in the U.S. And the third way is all this data going back into Beijing that is potentially being used to improve and train the CCP's artificial intelligence. So I think that's a problem. At the U.S., we have a number of inquiries ongoing. The Federal Trade Commission has been asked to take a look. Our Commerce Department is looking at it. And there was recently a report out that says our Treasury Department has cut at least a preliminary deal with TikTok regarding these data flows. So I, for one, am going to be watching that Treasury Department development very closely.
And specifically, I want to talk about, you tweeted recently about an article that said TikTok is partnering with companies to collect people's data on websites they visit. Now, Google's been doing this for years. Why does it matter that TikTok is doing it?
Yeah, this is an entirely new concern. I mean, up to now, I've been very focused on the data that someone that has TikTok on their smartphone, the data that's being accessed from that person's smartphone. But this new report from an organization called Consumer Reports showed that, in fact, you don't even have to have a TikTok account. But if you're visiting websites, that information is being captured and sent back to TikTok. And those are websites, everything from the Girl Scouts of America to Rite Aid Pharmacy to domestic violence websites. And you're right that other companies are engaged in similar conduct, including Google and Facebook. And frankly, I think we need a broader set of privacy protections in place. But it's one thing for Silicon Valley-based companies to be capturing this information and pursuing capitalistic ends with that data. And it's quite another thing that this data is ultimately finding its way back inside China, which obviously is an authoritarian state, and their use of that data is then unchecked by any sort of independent judiciary or otherwise. And in fact, if the data does then exist in China, it's subject to China's national security law. So it's much more problematic if that data goes back inside China than if it's just data that Google or Facebook has.
But on that point, TikTok previously said that all American user data is stored within the U.S. It identifies itself as an American company. It even said in a hearing that under no circumstances will it give data to China. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, there's been recent revelations that have demonstrated that those claims are nothing other than gaslighting. Just recently, an official of TikTok was testifying before the United States Congress, and she was asked, do you hand data over directly to the government of China? They said, no. That's great. They were asked, do you hand data over directly to the CCP? They said no. And then they were asked, do you hand over the data to members of the CCP? And they said, we'd rather not answer that question. I think that's pretty revealing. And in fact, internal communications show that, quote, everything is seen inside China. So this claim that the data is only stored here, only accessed in the U.S., doesn't even exist in China is simply not correct.
And let's just step back a little bit. We know TikTok is owned by ByteDance, the Chinese company. What is the relationship between ByteDance and the CCP?
Yeah, there's a couple of corporate chains there. There's an entity based in the Caymans. But ultimately, what TikTok itself has said is that they have personnel that work for TikTok inside of Beijing. And what we've been told from reporting is that either TikTok or ByteDance, the parent company, have members of the CCP that work there. And what we've seen from reporting is that TikTok employees are sort of dual-hatted. They work for TikTok part of the day, they work for ByteDance the other part of the day. And so there seem to be very deep ties between TikTok and ByteDance, and then beyond that, all of those entities back into the CCP.
And the data that TikTok collects, what is the CCP's end game with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of it can be used for just general espionage, blackmail efforts, which the CCP have been known to engage in. I think the other part of it is foreign influence campaigns, which would be trying to adjust and dictate and control what it is that people see in the news that they read. And again, I think the last part of it is that they're using it to train their own artificial intelligence, which could very much be used for nefarious purposes. I mean, look, we don't allow money to go to authoritarian states. In many cases, we don't allow kinetic missiles and arms to go to authoritarian states in certain circumstances. I think we've got to be very careful here about this data going back that could very well be used to train China's AI.
And amid all these concerns, it seems like TikTok is preparing to expand into e-commerce. And so for Americans, what's the significance of that if it actually happens?
Yeah, this is concerning. I mean, look, given everything that we know right now about TikTok, now is not the time for any regulator or any country to be blessing TikTok's expansion into new business lines. What we need to be doing is closely scrutinizing their conduct to date and putting sufficient protections in place. So I wouldn't be in favor of blessing expansion in new business lines right now.
Does TikTok have a lobbying presence in D.C.?
They do, yeah. They have a significant lobbying presence, and recent disclosures show that they're spending a lot of money in this town, and hopefully they're spending it not wisely, because hopefully people aren't going to be persuaded by that lobbying campaign, and instead they're going to look at the facts and the data that we have.
But I wonder if the lobbying campaigns are having an effect, because in 2020, the federal government forced TikTok to be sold to an American company, but in 2021, it was shelved. So is there a change in attitude towards TikTok in the federal government?
You know, I think if you look at the Trump administration and now into the Biden administration, there's actually a baseline within both administrations that's pretty tough when it comes to the security threats posed by communist China. So at this point, it's too early to say that those lobbying efforts are paying any dividends. I would just say that, you know, it takes time, it takes process to review and get to a final decision on these issues. But I do hope that this administration moves forward quickly here.
And what would you say, how do Americans protect themselves online in terms of their privacy?
Well, right now, I wouldn't recommend that people be on TikTok, given everything that we know. And beyond that, there's different security protocols that you can put in place to try to prevent the tracking of, for instance, where you visit websites that could end up getting translated back to communist China.
Commissioner, are you in the position that TikTok should be banned in the U.S.?
And look, I'm open, at least theoretically, to this idea that we could create a sufficient divider between U.S. user data and that data being accessed in either back inside China or by members of the CCP. I'm open to that. I think as a practical matter, it's going to be very difficult to get there because at the end of the day, we're talking about data, we're talking about systems that were built by China. So getting a sufficient level of confidence that we have stopped their access to this data will be difficult. So that may end up resulting in a circumstance where we need some sort of broader divestiture or corporate separation from China.
And just one last thing before we go, do you have any updates about the proposed ban on Huawei and ZTE?
Yeah, there's been a recent report that the FCC, where I work, is looking at not only stopping subsidies to Huawei and ZTE gear, but stopping them from being approved by the FCC for use by anybody in America. I can't comment on that right now because it's before the FCC, but I'll tell you that I would be very gratified if we end up taking that step of blocking Huawei and ZTE gear from getting equipment authorization approval in the U.S.
All right, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, really appreciate it. Thank you.